We've gone over kind of the basic mold design for RTV molding in CAD, like what are the basic steps, tips, tricks for it, and now I'm going to go over kind of the prep and the setup for doing the RTV mold. So the first thing after we've got the piece printed is we'll want to make sure that the pin alignment features are good. So I've already reamed out the pinholes. These are 1/8 inch. We can ream them out to just a little over 1/8 inch, so they're barely a clearance fit. So that's one thing you can check. Second is for these parts, we'll do a mold release, and you'll do a couple coats of this mold release. This just makes sure once the material that you're using cures on the part, it doesn't stick. If you don't do it, it'll be really hard to get off. So any surfaces that you anticipate is going to get any material on it, just spray it on the mold release, which is for the most part most of the surface, just to be sure. The spout here, I'll leave that kind of clean, just because that's going to be easier to get the syringe in if it doesn't have the mold release. So I've already sprayed these with mold release in advance on all the surfaces, and now we'll assemble it. And on a side note, this part might have to be reprinted because it was printed with too low of a resolution STL. So we're going to try it with this, but if it's the case that you can kind of see the ribs here, it's supposed to be perfectly round, we might have to reprint this part. There's no particular order for this mold, as far as like what pieces go first. So we'll just insert all the pins, which I've checked in advance the part to make sure they fit. We had a little bit of an issue with these holes on these side pins being a little too large, and I think that came down to the accuracy of the print in a certain orientation. So it would be a good practice to maybe undersize the pinholes a little bit, and then go in and ream them out or clear them out so that they fit better. So I'll take a minute here and just insert all the pins. Just making sure that when you're, if it's a cosmetic part that you care about the surface finish, making sure that you're not putting fingerprints on the faces that are molded, just because the mold release, it'll leave fingerprints. Okay, so I've got all the alignment pins in. I put duct tape around this perimeter where there might be flashing, and to hold these pins in because they're a little loose. So we've got that set up. Now we'll want to attach the syringe, which is what we're going to put the material in. So we get this big, beefy, huge syringe that will accommodate all the material that we need. Typically you would measure out like an estimate of how much material you would need. I haven't done that, but we'll kind of guesstimate this time. But you can basically use the properties on the material, look at the volume of your part, and just kind of give yourself a little bit of a buffer. So for this, what we'll do is put a little masking tape on the syringe, just to kind of give it a little traction, so that when we insert it into this, it'll stay. And then we're actually going to go over to the hot glue and glue this in. So you just kind of twist it in, screw it in, and then we'll go over here. And we want this fit to be pretty solid, just because we're going to be putting a lot of pressure, you know, forcing this plunger down, and you want this joint to be really solid, because if this seal breaks, you'll just get a ton of material that will start oozing out. So we'll just hot glue it. And this is the only place we'll use hot glue. I mean, there's a potential on some molds where we might have to do it other places, but I think this will be sufficient. So we'll do it one more time. Okay. So what we've done is added clamps to the whole part. You can never have too many clamps. One thing you have to do is make sure that it fits in the pressure pot if you're going to be putting in a pressure pot. The other thing we did is we inserted this syringe, and we put masking tape on the interface where it goes in, and then also hot glued it, because that's going to be a point that there's going to be a potential lot of pressure. So we want to make sure that's secure, because if that seal breaks, then you're going to have all this material coming out at this point and not filling up the part. So we've got the mold prepped, and actually real quick before I forget, it's good to do a little bit of mold release inside the syringe. That way you can reuse the syringe, because sometimes you're going to have some residual left in there, and this just makes sure that you can get it out, that the mold material releases from the syringe. Okay. So the material that we're using is Smooth On's Vitaflex 60A. So it's a 60A urethane rubber. One part of the A side and one part of the B side for the ratio. We're going to go over here to the... Okay, so we've looked at the volume of the part we're molding, and it comes out to, with a little bit of a buffer, about 80 grams of material. So we're going to do 40 of each, and then so you just put it on the scale, tear out the cup, and you want to start with the more viscous material, because it's going to be easier to dial in on the more runny material to get that correct ratio. So we're going to shoot for 40 grams. And sometimes the scale kind of takes a while to catch up, so you just take it slow. Okay. So we got 40.5. Another thing we use on this stuff is a degasser, or it's a dry blanket. So basically just increases the shelf life of the material. You just spray it in there before you seal it. And then now we'll do 40.5 on the B material. So I've shaken these up. You don't want to do it too vigorously, because it'll get air trapped in there, but just kind of, gentle shaking for a couple minutes if they've been sitting for a while, which these were. So now we need 40.5 on the second. And it doesn't have to be exact, just because one of these is basically how fast it cures, or it's kind of a curing agent. So if you're a little under, a little over, it's just going to cure at a slightly different amount. So it's not a big deal, but I was basically perfect, so we're good.
Basically perfect.
1.1 gram off. Okay. So looking back at the data sheet, this is a 60-minute pot life. So we have a lot of time to work with this and get everything set up, but maybe a higher durometer or a different type of material might have like a 5-minute work time. So just be aware of that, depending on the material you're working with. So we've got the two parts. Now we want to dye it. This part, they want it black. So since it's, typically I do like 1 to 2 drops. Since this is a little bit larger part, I'm going to do 4, just to make sure that it's nice and saturated with the black. I might even do just overkill a little bit. So you don't need too much, but if you don't do it, it'll kind of come out a little bit gray. And then I'm gonna grab these guys. Okay. So we got everything prepped, checked all your alignment, where your vent hole is, placement, checked the fit on the pressure pot. We've mixed up our material to the right quantities. We put enough dye in if it needs dyed. So now we're gonna start pouring it, and we're going to watch it outside the pressure pot, and then once it's up to a certain point, then we'll put it in the pressure pot once we feel comfortable. So it's on this one, it's probably going to just ooze out because we really didn't prep the vent hole. One thing you could do is put maybe a straw that would come up that would kind of allow it to vent out but not spill everywhere. But more than likely this one we're just going to get some spillage since it's our first time. So one trick with this stuff, because it does have air in the solution since we've been mixing it, is you want to pour from a high place to string it out, and that helps to kind of stretch out and remove some of the air bubbles in there. So that right there is pretty good. And you could probably zoom in close on the part and see if it's filling in anywhere.
Not yet.
So it might take a little pressure from the plunger to actually move it up. Look over here, you can kind of see it starting. It's probably going to take the plunger to get everything to go. So one key thing is when you're plunging this is don't put a lot of stress or like bending on this joint, because it'll pop out and then you have a big mess. So you just kind of gently, and you'll feel some resistance, just kind of gently start applying pressure, and then I'll start forcing it into the part. So you can actually hold onto the body of the plunger, and you don't want to do too much pressure just because that's going to make it want to shoot out the vents, or shoot out the interfaces where it might flash. So you're just kind of doing it slow, and really we're just going to do this until we see stuff come out of the vent. So I can see it if I look down, and what I might do is actually tilt it up a little bit so that we're not trapping any air bubbles underneath on this edge. So this kind of corner over here, we're just wanting to make sure that we don't get any flashing coming up. Are you seeing any flashing coming out the sides anywhere?
No.
It's a bit deceptive. You think it's like, see, it's black right there.
Yeah,
you kinda,
but
it's still pretty low.
Right
it's
there.
kind of,
yeah.
It's deceptively.
You see it on the side.
Yeah. So far I'm not seeing anything major coming out, which is good. And again, you're just making sure you're not overpressuring it. You're just kind of doing a gradual. You're not putting too much pressure at one location, because there's going to be some resistance for it flowing through the whole cavity. Oh, there we go. And you can see it coming out of the vent there. Looks like it's trying to come out the top. Yeah, it looks like it's flashing out the top. So we'll clamp these just a tiny bit more. Which is fine. We can trim off that flashing. Plunge it a little more. And what we want to do is leave like a little residual in this syringe, a little pressure, because it's going to try to backflow into the part. So now what we can do is take it over to the pressure pot and get it set up in there, keeping it in the same kind of orientation so we have that high spot.
No.
Okay. Put in a little bit more pressure. So we're all set up, and now we'll put the cap on. Attach it. Get it pretty tight because it'll get up to about 65 psi, so this just prevents it leaking. So it's already hooked up to the air line, so we're putting pressure in here. So basically what this does is it, as the air tries to come out of the solution, it just keeps it pressurized, so the air bubbles stay really small and you won't see the air bubbles in the part. So we've got our vent here with this fancy diffuser on there. So that goes closed. You'll open that up when we pull the part out. You've got your line in here. You'll put pressure in from the line in, and then you'll just monitor this gauge. It'll go up to about 65 psi, and so we'll just let that run, and we can go back and check the cure time here. So for this one, it's about 16 hours, but we could probably pull it out after about 12. So about the same, actually, yeah. So basically, just if we pulled it out tomorrow morning, we'd be good. And then also on the curing, it shows like doing a heat cure. So we'll try that just to get the part fully cured. So that's pretty much it for molding it. It's just going to stay in there under pressure overnight, and then we'll check it in the morning.